The night Ellison Vale handed his wife a birthday gift in front of 200 people. He had no idea he was handing her the last piece of evidence she needed. Evelyn Mercer Vale, 37 years old, stood at the center of the Grandview Terrace ballroom with a champagne flute in one hand and a smile that had taken her years to perfect. The kind of smile that said everything is fine while the mind behind it was cataloging every exit in the room. The ballroom belonged to the Grandview Hotel, which her company had acquired 18 months ago. She had not told Ellison that. She had not told him a lot of things. He held out the box with the ease of a man who had never once questioned whether he deserved to be admired. White ribbon, black velvet. The guests leaned in. "For the woman who has everything," Ellison said loud enough for the room. Aveline set down her champagne and took the box. She had met Ellison Harcourt Vale, 40 years old, senior partner at Keller Stroud Financial, at a charity auction 6 years earlier. He was handsome in the way that well-funded men often are, groomed, confident, with the easy laugh of someone who had never been told no often enough to learn humility. He had walked over to her table, sat down without being invited, and spent the next 40 minutes telling her about himself. She had found this interesting, the way a naturalist finds a specimen interesting. Not because it was admirable, because it was so complete. She had been the CFO of Aldenmore Holdings at the time. She told him she worked in finance. He nodded and moved on. They married 14 months later. It was a good wedding. Her mother cried. His father, Winston Vale, 68-year-old retired industrialist, shook Ellison's hand harder than he shook Aveline's and said, "You've done well, son." He barely looked at her. First year was almost fine. Ellison was busy, Aveline was busier. She had been promoted to president of Aldenmore Holdings' North American division 8 weeks after the wedding, a detail she had mentioned once over dinner, and which Ellison had responded to by saying, "That's great, babe," and then asking if she'd called the landscaper about the back fence. She had not called the landscaper. She had been restructuring a $47 million portfolio. She called the landscaper the next morning. The signs, when she looked back at them later, were not subtle. They never are. It's only that when you are inside something, you tend to look at it the way you look at a wall, not as a surface with depth, but as a boundary. You stop asking what's on the other side. Ellison began working late in the second year, not every night, just often enough that the pattern became familiar before she had a chance to examine it. He started going to the gym at hours that didn't quite add up. He stopped asking about her day and started answering his phone in the driveway before coming inside. She noticed. She filed it away. She was dealing with an acquisition in Denver, a board dispute in Boston, and a litigation matter she couldn't discuss publicly. She was also in the peripheral hours of her life, trying to keep a marriage intact. It was her assistant, Petra Huxley, who said it first. Petra had been with Aveline for 9 years. She was 29, precise, and constitutionally incapable of omitting relevant information. She placed a folder on Aveline's desk one Tuesday morning, sat down without being asked, and said, "I don't know how to not tell you this." The folder contained photographs taken by a building security camera. The building was a condominium in Midtown, where Ellison had told Aveline he met clients for dinner. In 2 of the photographs, he was not meeting a client. He was meeting a woman named Cassandra, 26, fair-haired, the kind of deliberately careless beauty that requires significant effort to maintain. They were not discussing business. Aveline looked at the photographs for a long time, then she closed the folder. "Thank you, Petra," she said. "Schedule me a call with Marcus Webb at 3. Petra hesitated. "I am fine. 3 o'clock. She was not fine, but she was also not going to make a decision while she was bleeding. She had learned that much. What Aveline did next was not what most people would have done, and she knew it. She did not confront Ellison. She did not call a divorce lawyer. She did not cry in the bathroom or throw anything or text her best friend. She made a plan slowly and carefully, the way she made every plan that mattered, by first understanding exactly what she was working with. She hired a private investigator named Roland Marsh. Roland was thorough, expensive, and had the particular quality of making people feel he already knew everything and was merely giving them the courtesy of catching up. Within 3 weeks, she had a complete picture. Cassandra had been in the relationship with Ellison for 11 months. He had paid for her apartment. He had taken her to a resort in Scottsdale on a weekend he told Aveline was a regional finance conference. He had charged it all to accounts Aveline didn't know existed. She had Roland widen the search. What came back was worse, though not in the way she had expected. The financial discrepancy wasn't ruinous. Ellison made good money and had burned mostly his own. But the pattern of behavior revealed something more corrosive than infidelity. He had told people she worked for him, not in any official capacity that could be traced, casually. At dinners, at his firm's holiday party. "My wife is in finance," he'd say, and if pressed, She handles some accounts for one of our client portfolios. As if Aveline's career was a favor extended through his proximity, she had been running a division that generated more revenue in a quarter than his entire firm produced in a year. She did not let herself be angry then either. Anger was information, but it was also weather. It passed through you whether you used it or not. She chose to use it. The expansion of Aldenmore Holdings into luxury hospitality had begun 3 years earlier and accelerated sharply in the 18 months preceding the birthday party. The strategy was Aveline's. The board had been skeptical. She had walked them through projections, acquisition targets, and a repositioning plan that her CFO later described to an industry publication as the most disciplined growth playbook I've seen executed at this scale. One of the acquisitions was a boutique jewelry brand called Varell & Coates. Varell & Coates was 60 years old. It designed and produced pieces in the upper tier of the luxury market. Not costume, not mass, but the kind of jewelry that required appointments and had waiting lists. Their pieces appeared in estate sales. They were the sort of thing old money kept in original boxes and newer money spent years trying to acquire. It was Ellison's father, Winston, who had first mentioned Varell & Coates at a family dinner 2 months before Aveline's birthday. He had brought it up, the way Winston brought up most things, as a vehicle for demonstrating that he understood quality in a way others did not. "There's a piece at Varell's," he said, cutting his steak without looking up, "that Ellison should look at. For Aveline's birthday, a necklace from their heritage line. That's the kind of gift that tells a woman you understand what matters." Ellison had nodded and said, "I'll look into it." Aveline had said nothing. She had signed the final documents on the Varell & Coates acquisition 11 weeks earlier. The necklace Ellison gave her that night at the Grandview Terrace was not from the heritage line. She knew this before she opened the box. Not because she had been told, but because she had spent the last 4 months learning Varell & Coates with the depth she gave everything she owned. She knew the weight of heritage pieces. She knew the clasp design that had been in use since 1987. She knew the certificate format, the engraving placement, the specific shade of the velvet lining in the original cases. The box was right. The velvet was close, but not exact. She lifted the necklace out with both hands, and she felt, very precisely, the thing that was wrong. The weight was off. The clasp was a replica, well made, but produced without access to the original specifications, which Aveline had locked behind a non-disclosure agreement when she assumed ownership. She looked at Ellison. He was watching her with the expression he wore when he expected to be thanked. "It's beautiful," she said, and then calmly, if she was simply curious, "Would you mind if I had it appraised before I wear it? I just want to make sure it's insured for the right amount. You know how I am about details." A few people around them smiled. Aveline was known in the circles she chose to inhabit for her attention to detail. Ellison laughed. It was the laugh of someone who was not worried. "Of course," he said, "but babe, it's a heritage piece. It's worth what it cost." "I'm sure you're right," Aveline said. She had arranged for an appraiser named Douglas Fitch to be in attendance. Douglas worked for a firm that contracted with Varell & Coates. He had been at the party for 40 minutes, introduced as a friend of a colleague. He was drinking sparkling water near the dessert table. Aveline caught his eye. He came over. What followed took 11 minutes, though it felt shorter to everyone watching and much longer to Ellison. Douglas examined the necklace with the portable loop he carried in his jacket pocket. He did not perform the examination dramatically. He was methodical and quiet, the way professionals are when they are not trying to impress anyone. He looked at the clasp. He looked at the stone settings. He checked the serial marking on the inner band with a small reference card. He handed the necklace back to Aveline and said, very evenly, "This isn't a heritage piece." The room, which had been murmuring around them, went quiet in the way rooms do when something shifts. "What do you mean?" Winston Vale said. He had moved closer during the examination, the way he moved toward anything where he believed his authority would be useful. Douglas looked at him briefly, then back at Aveline. "The piece is a high-quality reproduction. The setting is correct in style, but the specifications don't match Varell's production records. The serial number on the inner band doesn't correspond to any heritage piece issued in the last decade." He paused. "This necklace was not purchased from Varell & Coates." "That's impossible," Ellison said. He had gone very still. "I bought it from, I worked with a dealer." "Which dealer?" Aveline asked. He didn't answer immediately. Winston was staring at Ellison. "You told me you went to the boutique directly," he said. "I went through a contact," Ellison said. Aveline watched her husband's face rearrange itself, the certainty draining out of it by degrees, replaced by something more complicated. She felt very little, watching this. Not satisfaction exactly, not grief, something quieter. The particular stillness of a person who has been waiting for the water to reach a level they marked a long time ago. "What contact?" she said. "He named someone." The name didn't matter. What mattered was what it implied. That he had told Winston he was buying a heritage piece, had perhaps told himself the same thing, and had instead given a reproduction to his wife at a party in her honor, in a hotel she owned, wearing a necklace she had authenticated as false. Winston turned away from Ellison. He was the kind of man who dealt with embarrassment by locating it in someone else and moving away from it quickly. Aveline looked at Douglas. "Thank you," she said. "I'll have someone reach out about the filing." "Filing," Ellison said. "For the insurance record," she said. "In cases of misrepresented luxury goods, there's a standard process." She had not planned to say anything else that night. She was not a person who made speeches. She found them inefficient. But Winston Vale was not finished. He had been speaking to a cluster of guests near the bar. Aveline could hear him, even across the room, the smooth, authoritative murmur of a man redirecting a narrative. Something about the dealer being unreliable, something about Ellison having good taste, but being taken advantage of. Something about how these things happened. And then, with the ease of someone who had been doing it for 40 years, he shifted the register entirely. "The point is, my son has always had an eye for quality. You know, I've been in talks with the new ownership of Varell & Coates. Brilliant acquisition, apparently. These young investors really understand the market." He did not know he was talking about his daughter-in-law. Aveline heard it. The room heard it. She crossed the room. She did not hurry. She stood beside Winston and waited for a pause in what he was saying. He looked at her with the particular blankness men like him used for women they did not consider relevant to the conversation. "I'm glad you respect the acquisition," she said. "I made that decision 14 months ago." Winston looked at her. "Aldenmore Holdings acquired Varell & Coates in the spring," she said. "I'm president of North American operations. The Heritage line is a proprietary design under my company's license. The authentication standards Douglas used tonight are ours." She paused. "We take reproduction fraud seriously. It's actually why I wanted the appraisal done tonight. It seemed like the right time to close that particular loop." Winston did not say anything. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked at the guests around him. Some of them knew. Several of them had known for a while who Aveline was, what she ran, what it was worth. They had been curious, or perhaps courteous, about the gap between what she did and what her husband had described her as doing. She let the silence sit. She found Ellison on the terrace later. He was alone, standing at the railing with a glass he hadn't touched. The city below them was going about its evening without any knowledge of or interest in what had happened on the 14th floor. He heard her come up beside him. "I didn't know it was a fake," he said after a while. "I know," she said. "I should have gone to the boutique myself." "Yes," he turned to look at her. There was something in his face she hadn't seen in a long time, maybe ever. Doubt. Not about the necklace or the dealer or even the night. Something wider than that. The kind of doubt that arrives when you realize that the version of events you have been living inside is not the version that was actually occurring. "You never told me," he said, "about Varell." "You never asked what I did," she said. "Not really." He didn't argue with that. She gave him credit for it. "What do you want to do?" he said. She thought about the folder on her desk 9 months ago, the photographs, the resort in Scottsdale, the casual, confident erasure of her career in rooms full of people she would never meet. The 11 months of a woman named Cassandra in a midtown apartment. The years of coming home to a man who looked at her the way people look at a piece of furniture they chose thoughtfully but have since stopped noticing. "I've already spoken to an attorney," she said. "Petra will send the paperwork to your office Monday morning." She had the same stillness in her voice that she'd had at the table when she asked for the appraisal. The kind of stillness that is not absence but precision. Ellison stared at the city for a moment. "I thought," he started. "I know what you thought," she said. "That's been the problem." She went back inside. She thanked the guests. She spoke with Douglas for a few minutes about procedure. She said goodbye to her mother, who had come from Phoenix, and was looking at her daughter with an expression between pride and something older and harder to name. She ate one small piece of birthday cake, standing in the kitchen hallway, while the caterers moved around her. She did not look for Ellison again. The attorney was a woman named Bridget Callahan. 51, a partner at a firm that specialized in high-asset divorce and had a waiting list most people only accessed through referral. Aveline had been referred 8 months earlier, which meant she had been holding the number for 8 months while she gathered everything she needed. The filing documented the financial discrepancy, the accounts, the Scottsdale trip, the condo charges, as relevant to the disposition of marital assets. It did not mention Cassandra by name. It didn't need to. Ellison's attorney called Bridget's office within 4 days. He wanted to talk settlement. Bridget called Aveline. "They're moving fast," Bridget said. "That usually means they know what you have." "They do," Aveline said. "I made sure of it." The settlement was quiet and took 6 weeks. Ellison signed without contesting the primary terms. There was a clause about the house which she didn't want. There was a clause about the boat, which he had described to her as an investment, and which was worth roughly 40% of what he'd told her it was. She let him keep the boat. She kept, among other things, the reproduction necklace, not out of sentimentality. She had plans for it. Varel and Coates launched a public awareness campaign about reproduction fraud 4 months after the birthday party. Aveline had been developing the concept since the previous year, but the timing felt appropriate. The campaign included a short documentary, a series of authenticated purchase verification tools, and a media event at their flagship store in New York. The centerpiece of the event was a display case containing 6 reproduction pieces alongside their authentic counterparts. Each pair was labeled. Each fake had a brief description of how it had entered the market. One of the 6 was a necklace with a heritage-style setting, a near-perfect clasp, and a serial number that corresponded to nothing in the production archive. Its label said only, "Origin unknown, acquired 2026, submitted for public education." The display attracted attention from 3 industry publications and a piece in a Sunday-style magazine. A photograph ran in one outlet: the display case, the reproduction necklace, the velvet box beside it. Aveline was quoted once in the main piece, briefly, in response to a question about why the campaign mattered. "What people misunderstand about luxury goods is that it was never about the price. It's about what was made and by whom, and whether what you're being handed is the real thing. That's a question that applies to a lot more than jewelry." The journalist had laughed, perhaps thinking she was being literary. She was not being literary. Winston Vale called her once 6 weeks after the party. She did not recognize the number and almost didn't answer. She answered because she was walking to her car and had nothing pressing in the next 3 minutes. He did not apologize. She had not expected him to. He said several things that arranged themselves over the course of 4 minutes into a version of the night in which he had been deceived by circumstance rather than wrong in any meaningful way. He mentioned Ellison's potential. He mentioned the shame of the situation. He used the word disappointed twice. She listened. She let him finish. "Winston," she said when he was done, "I appreciate you calling." She meant it technically. She appreciated having the call logged. "Is there anything you'd like to say?" he said. She thought about that. "I think what I'd like to say," she said, "is that you've always understood quality. You were right about the heritage line. It's exceptional. I'm proud of what the team has built." She paused. "I hope you'll keep buying it." There was silence on the line. "Goodbye, Winston," she said, and ended the call. She got in her car. She sat there for a moment in the parking garage, with the phone in her hand and the engine not yet on. She had not cried about any of this. Not the photographs, not the settlement, not the birthday party, not the necklace. She had felt the appropriate weight of all of it. She was not unaffected. She was not a machine. But she had also known, for longer than she could have said precisely, that the relationship she was losing was one she had already lost. The paperwork was a formality. The party had been a door closing on something that had already been empty for a long time. She thought about something Petra had said once on a flight back from Denver when Aveline had been staring out the window for too long, and Petra, who tolerated silence but not the particular kind that meant something, said quietly, "You don't have to wait for permission to leave a room you're already not in." Aveline had looked at her and said, "Write that down somewhere for me." Petra had. It was still in Aveline's phone, saved in a note with no title. She started the car. The year after the divorce, Aldenmore Holdings completed 2 additional acquisitions, opened a North American office in Nashville, and was named to a list of the country's most innovative privately held companies for the 3rd consecutive year. Aveline gave a keynote address at a conference in Chicago that was later discussed in a business journal, in terms that made her sound, she thought, slightly more like a symbol than a person. She appreciated the coverage. She found symbols useful. She hired a new head of brand partnerships, a woman named Odessa, who was 32 and had spent the previous 4 years at a firm Aveline had been watching. She gave Odessa the budget and the autonomy and checked in on Thursdays. The heritage line, under Odessa's direction, expanded into a second collection the following spring. She started running again in the early mornings before the emails started. She ran along the river trail near her apartment. She had moved after the house was transferred and Ellison's things were gone, to a place with fewer rooms and more windows. She liked mornings. She had always liked mornings, but for years they had been consumed by someone else's schedule. She did not start dating for some time. She was not against it. She was simply more interested for the moment in the considerable pleasure of arriving home at the end of a day and having the evening be exactly as quiet or as full as she chose to make it. One morning in late October, she was running the river trail before 7. and she passed a couple arguing quietly but intensely on a bench near the footbridge. The woman was looking down at her phone. The man was explaining something. She could not hear the words, only the register, that particular tone of someone who is reassuring and defensive at the same time, which always means neither reassurance nor defense will be forthcoming. She ran past them. She did not slow down. 100 yards later, she stopped and stretched at a railing above the water. The city was waking up around her, a sound like something large and deliberate beginning to move. She thought about the photographs in the folder. She thought about the necklace in the display case and the label that said origin unknown. She thought about the call from Winston and the settlement and the birthday party and the balloon of calm she had lived inside for the 18 months before any of it was visible, when she had known something was wrong and had chosen, deliberately, to hold still. She had not held still out of fear or weakness or the particular blindness that people mistake for love. She had held still because she understood something she had learned in her first year at Aldenmore, watching a senior executive make a rash decision in the middle of a hostile acquisition. The most expensive thing you can do in any situation is move before you know the full shape of what you're dealing with. She had waited until she knew the full shape. Then she had moved. The water below the railing caught the early light and broke it into something that almost looked like intention. She watched it for a moment, then she started running again.